Good to see you. Today, we're going to be talking all about how to turn overthinking into your superpower. How to turn overthinking into your superpower. This is possible. Hi, Dorn. Good to see you. Hi, Leah. Good to see you. So, if you are a highly sensitive person, if you are a high achiever, um, if you have a hard time saying no to people, if you are a perfectionist, I'm going to guess that something that you experience a lot is overthinking, overthinking, overthinking. So, we're going to get into number one, like, why does overthinking happen? Hi, Caroline. Hi, Cloud to me. Good to see you. We're going to talk about why this happens and what to do about it. And I'm also going to share a personal story or two from my own life. So, before I begin sharing about my own story and we start getting into this topic, I would love to hear from you. What are the places that overthinking shows up in your own life right now? Is it like deciding which work project is the most important work project to work on? And you're like, oh my gosh, I'm not really sure. Like, I could do this, I could do this, I could do this. Hi, Soul Seeds Flower Art. Good to see you. Is it when you finally have some free time on the weekend and you have so many like personal dreams and goals? Maybe you want to start planning your garden. Maybe you want to reorganize and redo a whole room. Maybe you are thinking like, I want to find a new workout plan. But again, it's like there's just so much all in your brain at the same time. Or is it that you spend more time thinking about things than doing things? So please share with me in the comments if you experience overthinking. Where does this show up in your life? I want to have very specific examples so that we can do a little bit of live Q&A towards the end of our time together. So while you think about that, and while I wait for you to put some of that in the chat, either on YouTube, if you see me looking over here, this is me talking to YouTube, and then here I have Instagram up. So hi, YouTube and Instagram. But please put your comments in either one of those places, and I will get to them. Let's see, way more time thinking about things than doing things. Great, we're going to get into that today. Okay, so first, let me tell you the story. So I'm not sure how many of you know this, but I was a concert violinist as my first career. I went to conservatory for music school. I went to a world famous, like prestigious summer festival, and over the summer for multiple summers during my college years. And I want to tell you a story about how I, in this particular circumstance, stepped out of overthinking. So, the story that I want to tell you is where I went to this prestigious music festival. It's called Tanglewood. It was my first summer going, and I, was like shocked that I had even gotten in. I was like, oh my God, this is amazing. This is literally like my dream of dreams. This is one of the most epic things that will ever happen to me in my life, I thought to myself. And I got in, and then I saw on my assignments of the pieces of music that I was supposed to be learning over the course of the summer, there was violin concerto listed there. And I was like, oh, interesting. Okay. And then I saw solo and then I was like, wait a minute. I'm the soloist for a violin concerto? Like, what are you talking about? And also, this violin concerto, I looked it up. I looked up the composer. I looked up the violin concerto. It didn't exist yet. So the person who was the composer, they hadn't even written the concerto yet. So I was supposed to be the first person to ever perform this piece of music, which For any of you who have experience with like dancing or playing music, you might know that like what you can do is you can normally like listen to a recording to see how it's supposed to sound and kind of use those recordings as a little bit of a reference in addition to the printed piece of music. So, Kate at this time, which was this was 2008 by the way, had no recordings, no written music, and I get to the festival and I had been there for a couple weeks and still no score, still no music. And the performance date is slated for, I think it was like August 8th or August 18th. It's like July 7th, still no score. I'm like, I'm in full rumination mode. I'm like catastrophizing, disaster, everything, disaster, disaster, disaster. It's all a disaster. And then finally, hi Kim. It's okay, Leah, that you have to drop. You have a business meeting. That's totally fine. And I'm actually going to scroll back up and think about a lot what I want to do or would like from others. Um, totally relatable. And we're going to get into that in today's live when we start to deconstruct like spending time thinking about things instead of doing things and what prevents us from doing this. So, going back to the story, I finally get the score for this piece of music, this violin concerto that nobody has ever heard in the world before. And I was supposed to perform this thing in less than a month in front of, realistically, I wasn't even thinking about this at the time, but the venue where I was going to be performing it in holds like 3,000 people. So I'm like, okay, I have to perform this thing in front of 3,000 people in less than a month. I spent the next 4 days procrastinating after I got the score because my default up until that point, I was already a well rehearsed ruminator, catastrophizer. This is just something that I had like already done so much in my life. I was a perfectionist, probably, I mean, from a really early age, probably since I was like in late elementary school. I was already kind of getting hooked into this practice, this mental practice of perfectionism and overthinking. So, my constraint in this scenario was that I realized once I actually faced the score, I opened it and I stared at it, and there were like at least 5 new techniques that I had never done in my life before playing my instrument. I had never seen these like markings on my piece of music ever before. It was the most complex piece of music I think I've still ever learned, like to date, at least in its just like technical like difficulty. And I realized in that moment, I'm like, I do not have the time to overthink. And what I leaned on in that moment and in the next few days was a technique that a teacher taught me when I was in high school called crashing. And this is going to be actually a really important idea and concept that I'm going to carry through when we start kind of breaking down the actual like nitty gritty of how do you get yourself out of this overthinking um, kind of land that it's like so easy to live in. So crashing, as my teacher in high school explained to me, is you just literally try to play a piece of music from start to finish. Your expectation is that it's going to be terrible, so you're not like disappointed by anything that happens. But your intent by trying to play it all the way through, ideally without stopping, but with as little um thank you, Kim. Yes, Kate the violinist, for those of you who are watching and listening, was a really large chapter in my life. Very large, honestly, like for 25 years, pretty much. So, um, but the idea with crashing is that you are taking note of the places where you trip up. You're automatically, by expecting that it's going to go terrible, by expecting that this is not going to be anything close to the ideal that you have in your mind about what the result is supposed to be, you are letting go of like anything holding you to that expectation. And therefore, it puts you into this curious mode of like, you're already looking for, where are the places that I'm tripping up right now? So I went through that process. And when I was crashing this piece, I was stopping once every two measures. So like a measure in music is these little tiny units of time that maybe there are hundreds or thousands of them across a piece of music. So every couple seconds I was stopping and taking note. Okay, that's not working. Then I would go another couple seconds. Oh, I instantly failed. Like, just take note of that. What was it about that didn't work? Da 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 da, and so on, and so on, and so on. So, one lesson that I already want to kind of highlight for you here is that your brain has incredible analytical power. If you are an overthinker, um, you are brilliant, honestly. I think we're just going to get into this right now. This is like something that I was going to talk about later. But if you are a catastrophizer, if you overthink, if you ruminate, you are brilliant. Okay? I know that probably seems like antithetical to whatever you might have believed about yourself up to this point. But what that means about you is that you have such a strong analytical power in your brain that you're trying to analyze things ahead of time. You're trying to analyze an imagined future rather than a felt reality. That's a key difference, all right? You're trying to analyze an imagined future rather than analyzing a felt reality. And so, the number one reframe that I want to invite you into is me overthinking is not bad. I just need to give it data to chew on. And that's it. So, where in your life can you be pushing yourself, or maybe not pushing yourself, but inviting yourself to say, it's okay if it's not perfect. And we're going to get into why you might be hanging on to this idea of a perfect decision or a perfect outcome. Or I'm going to scroll back up to thinking a lot about what I want to do or what I would like from others. A lot of the reason in my experience why we are thinking a lot about the future is because we're trying to look for a perfect scenario. We're trying to look for a perfect decision that we could make about what to work on or what you want to do that would somehow save you from all pain, somehow would save you from all mistakes, somehow would save you from any kind of interpersonal conflict or poor outcome. And the number one thing that you need to do in that situation is acknowledge the emotion that's fueling the overthinking. Because this is essentially all about like anticipating loss, anticipating something terrible happening. So if you don't like, it's not about continuing to feel the fear. It's more about thinking to yourself, okay, I have this overthinking that's just going around and around and around in my head. What is this protecting me from feeling? What is this protecting me from feeling? What are the emotions underneath this that I would rather not look at that are actually what's keeping this whole overthinking train going? So in this situation where I was procrastinating on looking at the concerto, even after I was like, TikTok, come on, like I'm running out of time, realistically. And then I got the score and then I procrastinated for 3, 4 days, which at that time, I didn't have just a concerto to learn. I was also one of 4 violinists only in a chamber orchestra performing as a backing for the Mark Morris Dance Group, which is like this, I don't know, famous modern dance group. Um, and I think I was like the concert master of that group. And I had, I don't know, probably 5, 6 other pieces of music, very large pieces of music to learn all at the same time. Daily rehearsals lasting 3 to 4 hours for each one of these things. There was no time to waste, realistically, especially considering that I had a deadline and a real result that I had to hit. But what that rumination and that procrastination was protecting me from feeling was the intensity of the vulnerability of like, wow, this really matters to me. And I really, really want to do a good job. And what if I don't? So once I allowed myself to feel those feelings, even in little moments, I was able to reroute that energy back into the, okay, let's just crash this. Let's just try to have it go as shittily as possible from start to finish. And let's notice what is already difficult and then use your analytical power to zoom in on those areas that are already really challenging and figure out, how can I make this easier? How can I make it better? So the next thing in this story is I just kept crashing, and then basically I used my analytical self to prioritize what were actually the most challenging things and what were the least challenging things out of this overall hierarchy. Because once I got through the intensity of the emotions of like, everything is terrible, this is all horrible, I'm never going to figure this out, I felt those feelings, I allowed them to pass through me. And then once those emotions kind of like settled a little bit, hi everyone that's joining, um, then I was able to, again, use that incredible analytical power that I had in my brain that usually was put to ruminating to really good use because I had data to chew on. So, let's see, I'm looking at my notes here. So we've talked about the first thing, which is that when you're struggling to decide on what to do, when you're struggling to figure out what you want to request of other people, when you're struggling to just make any decision and you're just replaying the situations in your mind over and over again, or forecasting situations in your mind over and over again, it is usually kind of a 2-for-1. We're going to talk about the third one in a minute. Okay. So, number one, this overthinking is protecting you from feeling something. The feeling of anxiety and living up here and tension and kind of this hazy fuzziness is usually a lot more of a comfortable place to live than actually feeling the anger underneath, the sadness underneath, the despair underneath, the fundamental like existential doubt that's underneath, the reality that you can't control life. And realistically, none of us actually know what's going to happen at any moment. So much of my own personal overthinking and the overthinking that happens in my clients' lives is honestly because of this existential doubt, this feeling like life is just overwhelming and I don't really know how to face that overwhelm in any other constructive way other than thinking about everything like 5 million times over and over again as a way of trying to control for that. So, what is this rumination protecting me from feeling? That is probably the most important thing that you can ask yourself first. The second thing that we already covered is you are brilliant. Okay. Again, I think you're probably used to telling yourself like that you're, I don't know, a dum dum or just some terrible thing by like, oh my God, why can't I ever get anything done? Why am I always overthinking? Like, why am I always just getting myself into these terrible situations? You are actually brilliant. And your brain, something that I wrote down is like, your brain is like a herding dog, okay, that has like incredible intelligence, incredible amount of energy. That is being kept in a 500 square foot apartment and is only taken out for a walk for 10 minutes per day. This is not the environment that your brain is going to thrive in, is just doing whatever you're doing with your life right now. You actually need to be working on bigger things. You need to be working on more exciting things. You need to be working on more complicated and more challenging things because your brain, with its incredible high sensitivity, your incredible analytical power, um, your ability to draw connections that other people can't, because that's what highly sensitive people do. We see the connections between things that others might not be able to pick up on because we have more highly sensitive nervous systems. Um, this brain is like having a herding dog in a 500 square foot apartment. You need to be using your brain and putting it into projects and movements and visions that are big enough to hold the power of your brain. So if no one has ever said that to you, I really hope you take that in, that this is you overthinking is not a sign of your terribleness or your weakness. You overthinking is actually a sign of your brilliance and your ability to do incredible things in life. So the third thing that I want to get into, and this situation where I had to learn the concerto in a little less than a month, and I, was going into overthinking, but then I got myself out of it, was only because I had a very public deadline, a very like a very tight timeline, and not very much else that I could do about it. Like there was no other option. And I will say that although that constraint did help me in the moment, this is no way to live, okay? I was in extreme fight or flight in that moment, and that is the only way time, like that's the only circumstance, at least in that time in my life, where I was actually really able to kind of push through overthinking. So I do not want you to push through overthinking as your default, i.e., like, I don't want you to have to be in a state of fight or flight or just saying something, I don't know, not saying something, but like being in extremis. Like, I essentially don't want you to have to be in an extreme situation in order for you to get yourself to move past overthinking, because I wasn't honoring my emotions as much as I could have or should have at that time. There were other situations that were happening at that time in my life, um, where I was overthinking about a bunch of other things because there was some really real, terrible, difficult situations that I was facing. My boyfriend at the time was extremely mentally unwell, and I was worried about his safety on a daily basis. And so I was ruminating about that. In addition, it was just, there was no way to live. So, and realistically, most of the deadlines or the things that we want to get done that we overthink about in everyday life, there's no, hard consequence to that, in that there's no other person who's gonna like get extremely mad or end a relationship, or you're literally going to endanger their physical health or your physical health as a result of you overthinking. Like, in most circumstances in life, we don't have something that's that harsh. So, what I want to say in this situation with overthinking, it is really easy. I know this is the case for me, or has been in the past, and I still catch myself do this sometimes. Um, it is a lot safer, more familiar, and easier to think to yourself, well, I've thought a lot about this and it's been really stressful to think about. So I'm just going to give myself a break. I've been thinking about this all day. It's been stressful. I've been turning it over in my mind and I just need a break. So I'm going to go, watch some TV to take my mind off of this, or I'm going to binge YouTube videos to take my mind off of this, or I'm going to scroll through social media to take my mind off this. Here's the thing. Overthinking is genuinely stressful. When we do this, when we play out imagined catastrophic scenarios in our mind, we are jacking up our hormones. Like, we are actually putting ourselves in either a subtle or explicit state of fight or flight. It is genuinely stressful. And what I want to remind you of or share with you, which might be a little bit confronting, so buckle up, is that this slightly uncomfortable land that you've been living in has actually become pretty freaking cozy. This slightly uncomfortable, oh, think. And oh my God, that was so stressful. Okay, I'm gonna like take a break. This is a safe place because it's familiar. If you've been practicing rumination, which ultimately rumination is a thinking style that is rehearsable. And if you are feeling really comfy in this area, this is something that your brain has probably just practiced a lot. And again, this isn't to shame you or blame you. Likely you were taught either by your people who you were raised with, or the community, or your broader family, or your people at your school, that like this is how you cope. Um, and especially if you grew up in a high pressure, stressful childhood, either academically or through like having messed up kind of parents or growing up situation where you had to be hyper vigilant and try to keep tabs on everything and try to manage your relationships with everyone in your family to make sure you were okay. Like, this thinking style is very well rehearsed. Okay, so there's nothing wrong with you. There is nothing to be ashamed of about yourself. And you have the ability to make a different decision. You have the ability to choose to begin to turn this ship in a different direction, to slowly, decision by decision, turn it away from overthinking and towards experiencing. So, the thing that I really want to explain or kind of highlight about this feeling of safety in overthinking and then being like, oh, I've been really stressed out, so I'm just going to give myself a break. It's that it gives you a false feeling of accomplishment because your brain has been going. You get to tell yourself, I've been working. I've been like spending a lot of energy. Because the thing is, you have been spending a lot of energy. You have been stressed out. But what is the result of that? Usually with overthinking, we're kind of like rehashing the same situations and the same viewpoints and the same narratives over and over again in our heads. There isn't really very much new creative thinking that's happening. And so this is where what I talked about before, my violin teacher's technique of let's crash this. Crashing being, let's just go through this, let's start taking action and just expect it to be messy. And I'm totally taking myself off the hook for anything wonderful or amazing happening at all. That is where, as soon as you can give yourself even just a little snippet of action, then your brain, your beautiful, powerful, brilliant, strong, highly energetic brain that has nothing else to do except ruminate on things over and over again. Once you take that messy action, it will have something to analyze. And that is going to feel like such a relief. I can't even, just thinking about that in my own body, when I am able to create enough space in my mind body system to take action on something and then be curious about the result, all of a sudden, I move from my awareness living completely up here to all of a sudden I'm like aware of my torso. I'm aware of where I'm sitting. I'm more connected with my body. And so if you're having a difficult time moving into this curious stance, what I'm going to encourage you to do is to connect with your body and be curious about your body and your surroundings first. Because sometimes if you can't get yourself to be in a curious state, like about the topic itself, you can create a curious state about something else and then bring that curious state into the thing that you've been ruminating about. Does that make sense? So take something, okay, I know I've been speaking for a while, but take something right now that you've been overthinking about. Again, I'm going to scroll up and think a lot. Cloud to me said, think about a lot about what I want to do or would like from others. Way more thinking about things than doing things, Soul Seeds Flower Art said. So if you're here live with me, I would love to hear what is something that you overthink about right now in your life, because I would love to use that as an example. So let's say I'm overthinking about like, I have, a million household chores to get done over the weekend. I have a limited amount of time to do it all in. And I'm like, oh man, I don't know which one to do first. And I keep on turning it over and over in my mind, like, oh, should I do this first? Should I do this first? Should I wash my dishes? Should I vacuum first? Should I do laundry first? Like, which one is the right thing to do? Oh, and I need to prepare this thing for next week. And oh crap, I haven't ordered groceries yet. And right? So if you are trying to ask yourself to be curious about all of that and you're essentially not able to get there right away, what I would invite you to do instead in that situation is stop, take a moment, and orient to your surroundings. Slowly turn your head from side to side. Look all around your room, using your head, turning your head, your eyes, looking almost behind you. And as I do this, yeah, you can see that I just yawned. So I'm kind of like moving into parasympathetic even a little bit more as I'm talking to you. And then just notice, how does your body feel sitting in its chair or on the floor or on the couch or standing? How does it feel as you look around slowly at everything in your environment? And then try to find something in your environment that feels neutral to good to look at. For me right now, it is the glimmer of the sunshine on my piano keys over here. That feels really good to look at. And notice where that good and neutral feeling lives in your body. I hope you're trying this with me right now. For me, I feel the goodness of the sunlight on the piano keys. I actually feel that like embedded in and across my shoulders and my chest. It feels like a little glow here inside my own body. And so just by doing that, that can only take a couple minutes tops. Honestly, it could take maybe 30 seconds to a minute if you do it on your own, unguided. That is shifting your state to be in a curious and open state. And then that's when you can begin asking yourself questions about the thing that you're ruminating on, or you can just pick one thing to take action on. And then again, once you get just one action under your belt, and that action only has to be like 5 minutes at a time, one measure at a time. Remember from my concerto story, one measure at a time, just a little snippet of experience, be curious about it. a little snippet of experience, be curious about it. And that is literally how you do anything. That's how you actually get whatever it is that you want done in a shorter amount of time than you could have ever expected. At least half the time, I'm gonna say. In my own experience, doing this cuts things down really, a lot. So I'm gonna scroll through the comments right now. Whoops. I have so many interests or big things I want to do, but some are a few steps in the future. I overthink about how to get there because there are many paths, feels like a time limit, and I want to explore many interests along the way. It's like too many things that I need to do, some of which are not the first next step. Yes, there's so much that we can dig into here. All of this is very relatable. So thank you so much for sharing this. A couple of things are immediately coming to mind are mm, the urgency. So there's this kind of double bind that happens with rumination and urgency, at least in my experience and in the experience of some of my clients, which is that um, we often, at least I can speak for myself, we often, or I often in the past, would think so much about things that I would assume that everything I wanted to do in the future was going to take forever. Because my experience was I didn't know how to get myself to go into action. I didn't know how to see action stack up over time. I would ruminate and procrastinate over and over and over and over and over again, basically not do very much other than think a lot about all the things that I had to do. And then when I would take action, or when I would try to kind of move forward and on forcing a decision on something, I would think to myself, "Oh my gosh, but I wanna do all these things. There's not enough time to do all of them." And there are going back to one of the things that we talked about at the beginning, what is all of that protecting you from feeling? My hunch, based off of my own past experience, is that there's some grief there that needs to be processed about, like, how much time has passed already, or all the things that you wished you would have done already, and you're just sad about that, sad about where you are, and that sadness deserves and needs to be felt in order for you to have a clean slate to move forward on and to be able to have the space to creatively and playfully make decisions about where you want to go next. So when there's this really big charge underneath the the stakes are high for the decision making because you're telling yourself the story like, "Oh, well, it's taken me so long to do all of this already. Like, I basically haven't taken as much action as I've wanted to." There's a lot of emotion that needs to be felt and moved through you underneath that. And in my experience, of course, this I'm just throwing this out as a hunch. This might not be true for you, but I'm curious what this brings up in you. And I know we're going to be chatting in a little bit. So, um, too many things I need to do, some of which are not the first step. Yeah, we already talked about that a little bit. Why am I not able to scroll? Oh, I'm at the bottom. Okay. So let's see. JP. I'm trying to decide about next steps in my career, possibly a big change, but I overthink all the steps and risks involved until I decide it's easier to stick with my unfulfilling current job. Yep, I hear you. And again, I think for this, you really have to ask yourself, like, hmm, in this situation, if you think this is another hack sort of for using your brilliant, imaginative, meaning-making brain. If you project out into the future, 1 year, 2 years, 5 years, if I continue doing the same thing I'm doing now, which is like essentially having some comfort and safety and familiarity in this overthinking cycle. Again, not to no blame, no shame. This is a learned thing that you learned how to do for one reason or another, probably really early on in life, okay? There is nothing wrong with you. This is just an adaptation mechanism that your brain did, okay, to try to keep you safe. Because it's so familiar, this is just a comfy, cozy place for your brain to live right now. Isn't just think, think, think. Okay, I did a lot of work on thinking, then I'm just gonna give myself a break from this overthinking and relax. If you project this out into the future, I know in my experience, nothing changed. I was in the same shitty job, 1 year later, 2 years later, 5 years later. And the feelings I had hadn't changed, and the things I was thinking hadn't changed. And so sometimes now, actually, before I say what I was about to say, if you project out into the future 1 year, 2 years, 5 years, if I take small, iterative action, so 5 minutes of action at a time. And so for you, JP, overthinking all the steps and risks. So when we're thinking, oh my gosh, this is going to be a huge risk, it's usually because we're thinking we need to launch ourselves into this completely new reality without testing it out, without any little steps along the way. So how am I going to know if this, new reality that I'm trying to launch myself into is actually going to work out? You learn if it's actually going to work out by taking the little itty bitty steps to experiment and see how it feels. And again, there's so much to talk about like fight or flight, feeling emotions, like usually what is fueling this like desire to escape into a completely different reality is just that like things feel so bad right now that you're like anything would be better than this. And so I'm just going to like launch myself into that. But there is that part of you that knows that it's like I want to make sure that I feel good in my imagined future. And so how can I help myself do that? Tiny little incremental steps. So if you're thinking about changing careers, how could you take one 5-minute action today to expose yourself to a little bit more experience in that industry or a little bit more experience in that role? What is one tiny little, and I'm literally talking like a 5-minute action. Okay. Maybe that's like creating a Word document and like putting bullet points down already in advance of doing some brainstorming and researching. It really does not have to be big. It's these little tiny actions that stack up over time and create a whole new life. And so there's so much there are so many interconnected topics with this, but I think what I would encourage you to do right now is like number one, try to get at like what are the feelings fueling this underneath that I haven't felt, i.e., like have I given myself the time to actually feel how sad it is that of how unhappy I am right now in my current job? Am I like, have I allowed myself to feel all of that? Have I actually like given myself comfort and goodness? Or am I just ruminating as a way of trying to solve this problem? And then the second thing is tiny, 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 tiny actions. This is why we talk about micro wins on Friday, is because we're trying to teach our brains, okay, I achieved this outcome this week. What were the little tiny steps that it took me, tiny decision by tiny decision, to get me there? Okay, so and there's so many more things that I've created on this Instagram page, and actually pretty soon I have a mini course coming out. Y'all are the first people to hear this actually. I'm gonna be releasing a mini course that is how to stop burning yourself out as a sensitive high achiever. Um, my goal is to get this out by the end of the month. It's gonna be a private podcast, and I'm gonna be digging into basically every single thing that you would need to know to really actually turn this shit around and stop yourself from overthinking, ruminating, and burning yourself out, and get yourself into a career, a mission, a life, relationships that feel so much more satisfying and good to you than whatever is happening for you right now. So, there's plenty coming to continue to help with this. And if you scroll back on my page, there's a lot that can help you with this as well, JP. So thank you so much for bringing all of that up. All right. I have a client call in about 9 minutes. So I am going to jump off and drink some water, stretch, dance, move around, do my own thing to take care of myself. But I am so glad that you all joined today. If you watched this, um, I hope that there were at least a couple of little nuggets that you can take away from everything that we discussed today about how to, number one, look at overthinking as a superpower. You are fucking brilliant. You are brilliant. Okay. Brilliant. I need you to walk away with that understanding. You are brilliant. You need to use your brilliant brain on data that exists, i.e., not imagined data, and to analyze and iterate on that data that exists in real life that you just did. And the number one thing that I can say to you about how to get out of the cycle of overthinking is to ask yourself, what is this rumination? What is this decision paralysis protecting me from feeling? And how can I help myself feel that now to get that energy out of my body, to have a clearer channel and be able to move back into curiosity and be able to take tiny little steps moving forward. All right, y'all. Mwah. Have a wonderful rest of your day. And I will talk to you next week at this exact same date and time, Tuesdays at 10 a.m. Mountain Time, 12 Eastern. So, JP, this is so helpful. Thank you for sharing your insights. I'm so glad. Yes, and DM me if you have any other questions. I would love to keep chatting. All right. Bye for now, everyone, and have a wonderful rest of your day.